Vinland Saga is a period piece that ironically has its main character frozen in a moment of time. Despite massive historical events constantly unraveling around him, Thorfinn only thinks of one moment, and that's the death of his father. A single picture forever ingrained in his mind, constantly tormenting and haunting him. This one moment drives his entire upbringing, his most formidable and malleable years, allowing him to be used, controlled, and taken advantage of because he cannot and will not move on. It's an action-packed, bloody, gory mess fueled by rage, yet Vinland Saga isn't truly a story of revenge. In fact, it isn't even a story of war or suffering or raids and pillaging. The entire 24-episode anime we've by now grown to know and love is actually mere backstory, the grueling and sorrowful tale of Thorfinn's disastrous upbringing. Just a prologue to the true story, which the manga title aptly describes: Thorfinn's journey to Vinland. It's an expedition steeped in world history while creatively carving its own fictional path through reality that simultaneously highlights significant figures of the time and borrows from their larger-than-life histories to create an entirely new tale. It's an experience woven with anger, violence, acceptance, and beginning anew. This is Vinland Saga. Let's get into it. What's up, everybody? This is Mike. Welcome to Bonsai Pop. Before we begin, a huge shout out to our Patreon. Guys, this is the best community on the web, full of people that are so kind and accepting. I mean, don't take it from me. Check this stuff out. It's all written by our patrons from the heart. We don't ask for it. They just throw it out there. We love you guys. Thank you so much. If you would like to keep this channel going, I definitely recommend supporting Patreon. At least half the content we put out is Patreon exclusive, and it's cheap to enter, and it's a lot of bang for your buck. All right, so it's history time. I like Vikings. They represent a fascinating part of the past, clash between religious and moral ideals as they fought under King Sven to claim the throne of England, but bring up your mental picture of a generic Viking. The image that comes to mind for me is perfectly mirrored in that show Vikings, if you know what I'm talking about. You imagine these zealots of violence, tatty-daddied all over these massive horns, spouting from their helmets while screaming about Valhalla. It's quite the contrast to this ragtag group of vagabonds, yet historically, Vinland Saga's Viking depiction is far more accurate. The fantastical version of the Viking warrior we're spoon-fed through most mainstream media is just that, it's fantasy. In reality, they were just people with different beliefs than those that they pillaged, more pirates than anything else, raiding and bringing home their plunder before the winter only to repeat the cycle the following year. Mangaka Makoto Yukimura obviously did his research and strived to include as much truth into his fantasy as possible while taking elements of historical accounts from the Flaty Yarbok, the Saga of Greenlanders, and the Saga of Eric the Red, and built his story with detailed historical accuracy. And I think this is important. As much as anime fans can find themselves obsessed with Japan, clearly the Japanese romanticize parts of Western culture as well. I haven't even read these books. Yet where Yukimura's line between fiction and reality begins to blur is with the Joms Vikings. These mercenaries were considered an elite group of conquerors, said to be extremely selective in who could join their ranks, and even more strict on those within their order, not allowing any member to leave their home base of Jomsburg for more than 3 days without permission from the Brotherhood. It is also known that they were forbidden to show fear or flee in the face of any enemy of equal or inferior strength, only allowing retreat when a massive force would overwhelm them. But there's also very little that can be stated as fact about the Joms Vikings due to the lack of primary sources regarding them. It's in this void of uncertainty that Yukimura builds his characters, creating the legendary Joms Viking Thors the Troll. And it's with Thors that the fictional begins to meld with the historical, creating an entirely new history within what actually happened. As I mentioned earlier, the Joms Vikings were not allowed to leave Jomsborg or retreat, and Thors did both, hiding away from war and the Joms Vikings in Iceland, where he became the head of a small village and a family free of major violence and strife. Now, eventually, his wife Elga bore him a son, Thorfinn. Now, you may not have known, but Thorfinn Karlsefni was a real explorer who followed Leif Erikson's his route to Vinland, which, is Canada. However, he was not born to a legendary Jomsviking. He just had a normal father named Thord Horsehead, and yes, I pronounced that right, it is Thord, and I guess I can see why Yukimura changed his last name. Okay, on second thought, I don't. Horsehead's a dope-ass last name. However, there's nothing that states Mr. Horsehead was any sort of amazing warrior, or that he attempted to raise his son on a non-violent path, nothing like that. My point is that while plenty of Vinland Saga is based on truth, much of it also is complete bullshit. Case in point, Thorkel the Tall was real, he did fight for the King of England, and then mysteriously switched sides and joined Canute's army. But Thorkel was not a war-hungry madman who lived for fighting either, he just happened to be the Yao Ming of Jomsviking commanders for his day. And we also don't know how tall he actually was. Apparently height measurements were not really high on the priority list of medieval Icelandic literary writers. So just remember that while much of what we're going to discuss is real, the events, people, and places are steeped in creative license. So don't take everything as factual. Case in point, Mr. Horsehead, guy with the dopest last name. All right, here we go. So Vinland Saga begins with Thorfinn when he's 6 years old, a child full of life and energy who doesn't realize the sanctity of the sheltered and peaceful childhood he's lived. Yet that tranquil existence comes to an abrupt close through two events: the finding of a runaway slave and the Jomsvikings arriving at the village in search of his father Thor's. A quote from the owner of this guy whose freedom Thor's just bought for way more than he was worth. Chains keep people in their place. They keep them obedient and usable. A man with a chain around his neck, literally or metaphorically, has a lot fewer options than one who is unbound by any restraints. And the plea from the slave not to be shackled again obviously strikes a chord with Thor's, a man who also attempted to break his own chain and free himself from the past to start anew. Vinland Saga is a story filled with people chained to something from their past. And from the very first episode, the show is beginning to hammer in that lesson that the price to break your chain is often unreasonable at best, insurmountable at worst. Everyone is a slave to something. So Thor's frees this guy by sacrificing something of his own. And there's something deeply personal and saddeningly accurate about giving up that much for just a few moments of freedom. This slave gave his life, and it still wasn't enough until Thor's raised the stake. Slavery comes in many forms, my friends, especially self-imposed forms, and it often costs more than you have to break free of it. Now, when the Jomsvikings arrive suddenly and without warning, Thor's neck is pulled tighter than it has been in years. They are here for him. As a legendary warrior of the Jomsvikings, his treasonous desertion is being pardoned as long as he returns to the battlefield for the upcoming war.
Or else?
Now you're getting it.
But of course, finding out that his dad's a badass and seeing all these studly men with the war gear gets Thorfinn all hot and bothered. So to prove how hard he is, he breaks some kid's arm because children are psychos. Not feeling relieved enough from that, he goes looking for something that'll do a little bit more damage: a blade. He finds his father's dagger, and holding it aloft as the firelight glints off of it, Thorfinn is mesmerized by the steel, calling it beautiful. Right before it's suddenly ripped from his hand by his father, who grips the blade so tightly blood begins to run down his hand. And now, okay, this might sound harsh considering that at this point Thorfinn is like 6, but to be completely honest, he is a douche. He is our main character, but he is no hero. Thorfinn is an anti-hero. The way he looks at this weapon is the way I looked at being a punk rock star when I was a kid. I couldn't see the threats, I couldn't see the dangers and the sorrow, just the glory. Kids are dumb, but relatable.
Shut the fuck up! I'm going to make a noise police! He doesn't know I don't like this shit!
As long as you haven't become that adult. Regardless, Thorfinn is flawed. He's misguided, immature, and about as wise as that dude you got stuck to last time you were in the drunk tank.
I can't remember that car, Pop.
It's the father Thors who is actually the real hero of this story. So naturally, Thorfinn gets him killed immediately. Now, it's just my guess, but I would assume that in Viking culture, one doesn't get the nickname the Troll for posting spicy memes on the town crier. Trolls are big bads in Viking mythology, my dudes. Their power respectfully feared. Now, Thor's had a target on his head, and a trap was set up for him along his journey back to Norway at the Faroe Islands. But being the beast that he was, he likely would have made it through this trap unscathed, save for one small detail: Thorfinn had stowed away on his ship. And it's here that the hero-anti-hero line is perfectly drawn. Thors is sacrificing himself, or at least his freedom, for the greater good of his village and his family, but Thorfinn snuck along for what he assumed would be some fun. Now, heroes do what has to be done regardless of the consequences, but anti-heroes are usually people with major personality flaws who don't fit squarely in the evil box. They have just enough humanity to be relatable enough for you to find yourself rooting for them along their journey, even if you don't like them per se. And I know, this kid, again, still 6, but give him some time. Instead, let's look at our other anti-hero, Askeladd, a cunning risk taker and commander of the Vikings hired specifically to take out Thors. I do want to make sure we recognize that Askeladd is based on a Norse folklore character, Askeladd. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, I hate to admit it, I am not Norse, so if I'm saying these names not perfectly, I guess you can kiss my ass. Anyway, Askeladd is in a number of folktales and is generally characterized as the youngest, smallest, and weakest of his family, while being clever, bold, and patient. And he always ends up successful in the end. In these folktales, Askeladd generally has 2 brothers who often fail to remedy various crises due to their uninspired, conventional solutions to these problems. So Askeladd succeeds where his brothers fail, using far more creative, cunning, and unconventional solutions. And interestingly, no matter the odds, Askeladd always comes out on top. It's curious that the first introduction of an antagonist is based on a folklore hero who always ends up winning. But for those in the know, this is some heavy foreshadowing that Askeladd isn't who he initially seems, and there's far more going on under the surface. That being said, he's a real bastard one way or another. A pirate, a cutthroat, a sneak, a schemer, and a bootlicker when he needs to be, but again, there's that humanity that keeps you rooting for him. So Thors' ship is ambushed by Askeladd's Vikings. Thors is unfazed, except maybe a minor flash of disappointment when he realizes that Thorfinn is going to have to see him fight. Clearly, Thors knows his son and himself. He knows that this is going to look awesome, which is only going to fuel his own kid's naive drive to become this warrior that exists in his head. So, of course, Thors proceeds to bitch slap all the pirates barehanded before finally drawing his sword and challenging Askeladd, son of Olaf, another nod to the Vikings' historical counterpart with his surname there, to a duel. Now, Askeladd draws first blood, being the cunning f***er that he is, but Thors just beats on this dude's sword to the point of breaking. With Thors' blade destroyed, Askeladd gains this false sense of security, which Thors then stuffs back into him with the quick punch, leaving the duel finished and Thors the winner. But these are pirates, my dude, Vikings. They were paid to do a job, and some stupid ass honor, that doesn't mean shit to them. Most pirates may be dumb, but cutthroats know a hero when they see one, especially one as obvious as Thors. I mean, can you be more glaringly one note, taking all these dudes on alone, using your fists so you don't kill anyone? I mean, come on. Askeladd asks why Thors has been hiding for so long despite these awesome skills that he's got, and the reply is simple. I must rely on a sword like this because I am not yet a master. A true warrior does not need a sword. Now, what the f does that mean? Is this Japanese karate doctrine getting lobbed in there? Is Thors working on his Hadokens in his spare time? I don't know. Doesn't matter. Despite winning the duel outright, Thorfinn gets held hostage by Askeladd's right-hand man Bjorn, which of course breaks the rules of the duel. Yet, Thors places his trust in Askeladd's honor, throwing his own sword away in the symbolic gesture, showing that Askeladd can take his head as long as he adheres to the rules previously set for the duel. Askeladd accepts his terms, and with a raise of his hand, he declares Thors the winner while arrows rain down, piercing the dude's body like head to toe, man, it's crazy. And Askeladd does keep his promise after that. He leaves the rest of Thors' party alone and withdraws with all of his troops immediately. Now, it's at this point where I was brought back to Thors gripping the dagger's blade, just standing there in front of Thorfinn, blood running down his arms. He says, "No one has any enemies. There's no one who it's okay to hurt." These words, given by one with the troll as a moniker, fell on deaf ears of a boy who now has some dead-ass eyes. In Thorfinn's mind, he has an enemy. He has someone he wants to kill, and he's going to use his father's weapon to do it. Like a film, life is constantly changing, my dudes. Lighting, direction, camera angle, characters grow and change, reacting, evolving, and learning from the events around them. But Thorfinn from this point on is stuck in a static image of his own making, chained and enslaved to his own anger, defining his enemy. Because if you think about it for more than half a second, it's ironically not Askeladd who killed Thors. In the end, it was Thorfinn who dealt the final blow by ignoring the wisdom imparted on him by his father. And so begins 12 long years of war and death for Thorfinn. So Thors' death marks the beginning of arguably the most important relationship in Thorfinn's life, and that is his connection with Askeladd. The hunt begins immediately with Thorfinn stowing away with Askeladd's crew. He sneaks in with the intent of finding and killing Askeladd. But when he does, he raises his sword over the sleeping dude's form, but Thorfinn cannot bring himself to swing the blade. Supposedly, it's not the fear of killing that stops him, but the fear of disgracing his father's memory with such a dishonorable kill. Again, I don't know if I really buy that. However, going the dual route proves futile, and Askeladd beats Thorfinn's ass while enlightening the boy on exactly how and why he is failing. Begin training montage. So for the next 10 years, we see this cycle of Thorfinn and Askeladd, the latter of which quickly stops dueling for free and begins to use Thorfinn towards his own goal via these tests. Now I'm going to be straight up, Vinland Saga has excellent animation and choreography, but it is rarely about the fight scenes. Instead, it heavily focuses on the inter-character relationships, and the one between Thorfinn and Askeladd isn't friendship, but it is consistent and mutually beneficial. Askeladd becomes a sort of hated caretaker, maybe even a father figure, I don't know. And Thorfinn becomes Askeladd's ace in the hole, the person he can count on for tasks that no one else would possibly agree to. This in turn feeds and houses Thorfinn. It's a symbiosis. In Askeladd's eyes, the kid is reliable, yet expendable. Essentially, he's the perfect soldier for him. Need a messenger who could get killed? Send Thorfinn. Need someone to ride through a forest fire? Thorfinn. Want someone to go 1v1 against the strongest Viking to ever live? Thorfinn. There is nothing too stupid or dangerous if living through it means the reward is a duel or a beatdown. Is this self-punishment? Maybe. Maybe Thorfinn realizes he is directly responsible for the death of his own father somewhere deep inside, and he wants that pain. I don't know. He's so jaded. Nothing but the brush of steel inches from him seems to shake him at all. We see the first life he takes, a struggle for survival that scars and traumatizes him, only to flash forward through the years as he becomes more and more proficient as a killer, taking on and demolishing soldiers twice his size while outnumbered. There is no doubt the kid is a cold-blooded killing machine. At one point, he's given shelter and mercy by an innocent and kind woman. Then he turns around and dooms her to whatever fate the Vikings have in store for her, which I can promise you is not good or painless. He's still stuck in a moment. He's a slave to his anger. It's been 10 years since his father died, and nothing has changed except his height and precision with a blade. Despite getting stronger, faster, and more deadly, Askeladd has no problem defeating Thorfinn. In every duel, he gets under Thorfinn's skin, makes him lose composure, and then exploits the openings that come from this little dude's rage attacks. Yet somehow, despite how legitimately disgusting Thorfinn is, his dogged determination comes off as kind of admirable. Every time he hits a new low, there's just enough hesitation to show that sliver of humanity he still has buried deep inside. As for Askeladd, it's clear that despite using Thorfinn to further his own goals, he's also deliberately educating him, guiding him, and keeping him alive. Now, we are still talking anime here, so I just would like to point out that it is rare to see two antagonists as the focal point for a story, which is arguably the defining feature of Vinland Saga. Again, the anime. Because it's historical fiction, we know how it ends, we're living it, it's already happened. The series just hyper-focuses on two shit individuals and their dance together as they navigate their way through a warring world. Neither of them really moving forward or backwards, just around and around. It's when bigger players come in and the world begins to open up that change begins to occur. Now, as far as the series as a whole is concerned, the anime takes place in a single arc called the War Arc. It's a little on the nose, but at least it's accurate. Either way, it's kind of important to understand this actual time period. This is not a war with a specific name because England had been invaded by Danes for hundreds of years at this point IRL and would continue to be invaded for another 100 years plus after. However, this particular invasion of England was the climax of Viking raids spread over multiple decades that would eventually end with King Sven Forkbeard controlling all of England and Denmark. The battles and political scheming act as the setting for Thorfinn's most formative years. I also want to be clear that during the Viking Age, the word Dane became synonymous with all Vikings that raided and invaded England. Vikings consisted of Norse warriors that originated from not just Norway, but Denmark and Sweden too. So don't get confused if I'm using Viking and Danes interchangeably. Vinland Saga starts in the year 1002 when Thors is killed by Askeladd. Thorfinn is 6 years old. In 1013, Askeladd's company gains employment as mercenaries during the Danish invasion of London. While the Danish invasion is successful overall, it doesn't exactly go well for Askeladd due to some miscalculations on his behalf. Also, because in Vinland Saga, nothing good comes to those who hurt others. It's almost thesis direct. Thorfinn's self-imposed chain to Askeladd and everything he's given up for a single act of revenge, which he's too proud to even get, keeps him in a purgatorial state. The cycle of violence will not end for him. This should have you wondering then about Askeladd. There's certainly a tangible web in which Thorfinn is stuck, but what is it that drives Askeladd to spin his wheels like he does? I'm not even gonna play with you, it's revenge. Now I'm gonna mark spoiler territory here. If you haven't watched the anime or read the manga yet, this is your out. Up until this point, we've only covered the basics of the story. Now we're going to get really into the spice and eventually the manga story post-anime. You've been warned. So it turns out that Askeladd is the bastard son of a Welsh noblewoman who is captured and enslaved by Askeladd's Viking father, Olaf. This makes him half Welsh, half Dane, and his ancestry can be traced back to the great Roman hero, King Artorius. Artorius was actually a Roman commander in real life who is a potential basis for King Arthur. So Askeladd is bound by this ancestry, but more importantly, bound to his mother. He hates Danes because he hates his father and what he did to his mother, whom he does love. To Askeladd, Wales is the embodiment of his mother, a mother who continually told him that Artorius would come and change the world, but he never did. So now Askeladd sees it as his duty because it's gotta be someone's. He hates warriors and the society that destroyed his and his mother's life, but recognizes that as long as Danes and Vikings exist, Wales will never be safe. And may I just add that the fact that a Japanese dude knows about Wales is pretty impressive. Like, I only know it exists because I'm Welsh. I mean, even the Brits pretend it isn't there. Anyway, in his eyes, the only way for Askeladd to effect real change is to hold a seat of power within Viking society. And so he becomes Prince Canute's right-hand man with the hopes that he'll eventually be the advisor to the new Danish king, giving him enough power to keep Wales from harm. However, King Sven sniffs out Askeladd's weaknesses and gives him a choice. Askeladd can either stay on Canute's side or save Wales from a Danish invasion next spring. It's an impossible choice. Either way, we'll see Wales invaded sooner or later. It's just a matter of time. He needs to gain a seat of power, but at the same time, he needs to ensure Wales isn't invaded and decimated before he gets that power. But Askeladd stays true to his namesake and wins the only way he can, through self-sacrifice. He beheads King Sven and allows himself to be killed by Prince Canute, ensuring Canute will rise to the crown while saving Wales from an invasion in the next spring. It's an impressive ending to the most complex character in the entire anime. However, Thorfinn and Askeladd were a lot like a strand of DNA. The two double helixed around each other, connected by ties only to be seen with a microscope. Thorfinn wishes for revenge for his father, Askeladd for his mother, both of whom were destroyed by the Vikings, yet both antagonists are also now Vikings in order to further their own goals. The symmetry between the two runs deep, but with Askeladd's death, the sequence becomes unraveled, leaving Thorfinn to spin off into the chaos. Askeladd could easily be seen as a potential future for Thorfinn if he continues living for revenge and violence, but having that purpose stripped from him leaves Thorfinn stranded. At first, he refuses to believe Askeladd is dying. In a scene reminiscent of Thor's death, Askeladd asks Thorfinn how he plans to live his life, and strangely enough, offers him some advice. Move forward. Don't stay stuck in this damn boring place forever. Become a true warrior, son of Thors. There it is again. It's that true warrior shit. No swords for a true warrior, dude. Whatever. In one ear, out the other. When you live for someone else, no matter how that person ends up leaving you, You do become hollow in a way, a bit of an apathetic shell of your former self. The static picture that Thorfinn had called home for 12 long years shatters in this moment. Thorfinn was so focused on Askeladd, so blind to life, that when Askeladd was taken from him, he's not even relieved. He's not released from his own enslavement to anger. Instead, his entire world falls apart around him. He needed Askeladd as a reason to continue living. He was Thorfinn's fire. He never once thought about what would happen after. What to do next. When you live for something or someone other than yourself, when your entire purpose is beyond you, the effects of losing that purpose or even completing that purpose can be devastating. This scene is Thorfinn's wake-up call. He has no life, he's got no purpose. He can cut a mean sashimi, but those skills are useless now. He's angry, he's confused, he's scared, and his life is suddenly moving again without anyone to control it. He drops his father's dagger, and the prologue ends. And it's funny because in a way at this time, not only has Askeladd died, but Thorfinn, the one that we know, the one that is the anti-hero, has kind of died as well. So the anime ends on chapter 54 of the manga out of a current 183 or so. Chapter 55, titled Slave, jumps 4 years in time. Thorfinn is now a hollow shell of his former self. All that anger and hatred has been replaced with apathy. He doesn't have any fight left in him. He's a slave on a farm, taking shit from the free men without causing issues because he doesn't even have the strength to care. He's tormented by horrific nightmares where all the men he's killed are trying to drag him to hell over and over. He's at the point where he's telling other people to kill him. Yet, when his life is actually threatened, he suddenly jumps into a fighting stance without even thinking. To him, it seems like an innate will to survive that surprises him. Look guys, I'm gonna be honest with you, I've been depressed my whole life. I was born this way, it's just the way it is. I was first put on medication when I was 9. I've been through some stuff, you know? And last year was easily one of the hardest times that I think most of us have ever had. And for me, it was really bad. And you know what I did? I ignored it. Not necessarily what was going on, but how what was going on was affecting me. And honestly, the one time that I really spoke out about it in public was during our Afro Samurai video, which I still wake up to delightful racist comments on. Thanks, guys. Not to mention, it almost killed our entire channel because of a certain platform's desire to be as inoffensive as possible. And to be perfectly honest with you, the only reason that we made it through that period was because of our awesome patrons, who I have so much difficulty feeling worthy of. Not to mention that at this point, I've been doing this professionally for 6 years, and I've kind of hit my limit on a couple of things. Back when I was working on a previous channel, my life was editing, and I loved it, and I got better at it, and it was the best thing ever. But I also obsessed over it, and it was unhealthy, and I started having panic attacks at the computer desk. And after a while, editing it wasn't fun anymore. It was scary. It was frustrating. It's a lot of work. It is no joke. It is a lot of work. And now that I'm running my own channel, I've hit my bandwidth on it. I have so many things to do as a person who presents these videos to you that honestly, to me, like doing all of the editing that I do, it just doesn't make sense anymore. It doesn't work anymore. You guys have noticed probably that we aren't able to put out as much as we used to. We are making longer videos, but I want to be doing at least twice a month. But when I'm editing, I can't write. I put it off until the end. I wait until the last minute, and it just it's bad for me. So if you noticed in the beginning of this video, there was a credit for an editor. This week I broke, and I realized that this was the problem and that I had to get somebody to help. You know, we get hate comments for talking about our Patreon as much as we do. I mean, that money is split 50-50 between Tyler and I. We are still poor. We are in the poverty line, and at this point, I mean, just for my own mental health, I have to find and pay somebody to lift some of this weight off of my shoulders. So I guess in one way,
This is, you know, hey, we're looking for an editor or editors who know that they can do what we do. And at the same time, this is me. I'm just being honest. I'm opening up with you guys. Like, this is the life. This is what it is. People in our situation, we need help. And now we need to pay somebody new. So, you know, I'm glad that I took a step forward with being honest with myself. You know, I feel bad that I wasn't able to continue editing. That sucks. You know, I'm super picky. Like, I'm anal about how everything comes out in these videos, which is why I'm still doing the final edits and everything. But it's and all through 2020, I was just like, focus, man, focus. You know, there's people out there that are risking their lives to work in grocery stores. Like, the very least you can do is entertain them. And you know, we made it through 2020. I'll say it, but I really, you know, I neglected myself and my own mental health, which is, you know, not what I'm trying to put out here. You know, I'm trying to do good for people and put out the right message. And I guess my point is that we all have chains, millstones around our necks, and sometimes we need other people's help to lift that burden and reach out to people who are closest to us. And, you know, thank goodness I have Devin and Tyler here, and it's an important thing.
It's something that eventually happens with Thorfinn. A new slave on the farm starts to change him. Together, if they can turn the forest into farmland to yield enough crops, they can actually buy their freedom. They spend nearly every minute of every day together, and Thorfinn honestly doesn't understand why Einar is so nice to him. Einar literally has to explain that they are friends and what friendship is, but this friendship begins to pull Thorfinn back from the brink and actually gives him a reason to live: freedom. Together, he and Einar work the land, plant and grow crops with the idea of gaining this freedom. And by the time they completely pull out every tree from the forest, Thorfinn is literally jumping for joy. This may be the first time we've seen the guy smile since he was a child. So what will you do when you become free? It's now Thorfinn's goal to rid the world of war and slavery, my dude, but there is no way to do that within this established system of the time. So he comes up with a new idea to create the perfect society in Vinland, a land of legends spoken about during his childhood. He literally cannot handle another death on his conscience and actively believes that he must atone for the death he's responsible for by doing as much as he can to create a society that has no war and slavery. But he won't break his own morals to make this dream a reality. That would make him no better than a dictator in his new land, right? And by now you should be going, oh, so that's what that true warrior shit was all about. The true master, he doesn't need a sword because he doesn't have any enemies. I get it. If it's not okay to hurt anybody, it's not okay to hurt you. Look at that. That's some full circle symmetry shit working out. It's like Thorfinn came to his own realization of his father's words through making his own mistakes and is now picking up the mantle his father left behind. So I'm going to be honest and admit that isn't all that deep, but look, it's classic, right? You can see the contrast when Thorfinn meets Canute again. It's one man attempting to do everything to stop the violence, the other instigating it in the name of the greater good. It's this classic clash of ideals. It's very Western comic if you think about it. We see this a lot with our own superheroes over here. I kind of wonder if that was on purpose. Either way, Canute understands his father now more than ever. He realizes a king is not a ruler, just a slave to the crown, doing what must be done to gain and maintain power. And when Thorfinn and Canute cross paths, it's an important moment which clarifies the goals and differences of each man. Both are attempting to form a perfect society, albeit through different paths. Canute is a conqueror and king, Thorfinn a pacifist and a slave, yet they are both working for the same goal of a utopia without war or violence. And so Canute departs, happier all the same to see another path taken towards his goal. And in an attempt to think along the same lines as Thorfinn, Canute disbanded most of his Danish troops, which had been a massive tax burden for his English subjects, and limited the numbers of his standing army. His new English subjects didn't revolt and grew to recognize his leadership as a good king, which is good. There's a major difference between peace, my dudes, and pacification, right? Peace goes hand in hand with happiness. It's hard to be happy with a sword to your throat. You may not swing your fist lest you lose your life, but it's hard to consider that situation peaceful, that situation is pacification. So the themes and motifs speak for themselves. We've seen the change in Thorfinn already. Where we leave it here, the journey of the anti-hero is complete. Because let's be honest, it only works out two ways. Either the anti-hero is redeemed, or they end up in tragedy. In a way, we get both endings with Askeladd and Thorfinn. It's difficult to consider Askeladd's end a redemption. He seemingly only staved off the inevitable and died an early and violent death. Whereas with Thorfinn, even if he slips along the way, his end goal is seemingly set. Then again, this is manga, so who knows? He could get canceled, or Thorfinn could become a victim of a particularly randy tentacle monster. However, his idea to build a new society definitely struck a chord with me that I wasn't expecting. Now, I'm not saying that my dad died when I was young and I grew up on a battlefield, but I've definitely felt stuck in a moment of time. I felt like my emotions have controlled me, and then I had a time in my life where I definitely was nothing more than a lifeless corpse just going through the motions. And it took a lot to bring me out of that mindset. Thorfinn is willing to get beaten to a pulp, run away, and even give up his life in the name of this new non-violent quest to create a peaceful land for those who want to live that way. A true warrior doesn't need a sword because they always find the peaceful path. It takes a true warrior to find peace. And it got me thinking about what I work towards in life. I've always considered happiness to be the most important thing to me. And for some people, the path to happiness is money, or power, or love, or family, any number of those things really. But I think everyone has something that they strive to get out of life. I mean, that's why you live, right? And I've measured my own success in how happy I've been. But after reading and watching Vinland Saga, I think I've redefined the line. There's plenty of things that I do that do not make me happy. For example, I love making these videos, but it's not always fun. All work has aspects that I would rather not do, but I do them anyway. So the question is why? If I was really just pursuing happiness at any cost, I would avoid all things that I don't enjoy, yet I still brush my teeth, So happiness has always been somewhat of a stand-in for a feeling that I wasn't sure that I had a word for. But I think I do now, maybe, possibly. I think I'm always pushing for freedom. Freedom used to be pretty simple. You were either a slave or you were free. But nowadays, I think the idea of freedom has evolved into something more. I grew up in this country, America, the land of the free. But as I grew up, the more I looked at it, it didn't really feel that way. Mostly because it's not that way. But the idea behind that phrase is what I'm talking about. It's about having opportunity, pursuing what goals you choose. It's the idea of the American dream, even if that dream is dead. Because still, we have things that tie us down to life. Bills, relationships, jobs, pets, homes, children, friends. Like Askeladd said, everyone is a slave to something. And I think that he's right, that everyone is tied down by something, many things sometimes. And when I was homeless and I had nothing, that was the most free I ever felt in my life. And did I feel good? Not really, but I was able to breathe easier than I do now. Having these threads in your life, these chains, don't necessarily make you a slave to them, and that's something that you constantly have to keep in mind. I think freedom means that we have the ability to choose what we want to be connected to. We can choose how we want to live, and that agency is what it means to actually be free. We choose what we're chained to, but it's not really a chain if we want those things to ground us. For instance, I'm connected to my partner. I'm connected to Tyler, to our patrons, not because I have to, but because I choose to. And in the past, I've been connected to things that I did not want to be, and I broke those chains. And that choice to decide what is and isn't in my life is how I've started to define at least a certain aspect of freedom. Vinland Saga is the story of a little kid who doesn't understand what he has, goes through a traumatic death, and over a decade of resentment and rage, followed by years of uncertainty and depression, only to come back from the brink with the desire to right his past wrongs by creating a society where anyone can be free. And throughout the entire saga, which again isn't done, but so far the biggest moments are when people choose freedom over the easier option. Because it is easy to be complacent. It is easy to be told what to do. It is easy to maintain the status quo. But Thors died so his village could be free. Askeladd died so Wales could be free and protected with Canute as king. And despite his past constantly trying to pull him back into the war and violence, Thorfinn continues to choose freedom over and over in pursuit of a true society where everyone can enjoy the same benefits. Vinland Saga isn't a story about people bound by their past or chained to society. It's a lesson about being bound to emotions and gaining control over your life and realizing that everybody should be able to enjoy that control. In history, Thorfinn Karlsefni did make it to Vinland. His son Snorri was born there, but he eventually returned to Iceland. In Vinland Saga, we don't know how it's gonna end, but for me, at this point, it doesn't really matter. That's not saying I'm not gonna keep enjoying it, but it's not about whether or not Thorfinn succeeds in building a colony away from war and slavery. It's about the choice he made to try. He took all those years of pain and anger and sadness and cast it aside for a new life that he chose. And I think we all deserve to choose our own path. I think being born into this shithole, we earn that. However, it's not something that's any more a reality in our world than it was then. We're still all on a path towards true freedom. Some of us are farther along than others, and I don't even know if it's possible to truly be free in life. But Vinland Saga really made me think, and it really reminded me that it's a path worth following.
Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching the video. I just wanted to come out here personally and say thank you to every one of our patrons, especially the guys that are in Super Saiyan 4 and above. Shout out to our lucky patron of the week, Mecha Cake, and our Super Saiyan God Plus of the week, Ranch. Your donations are making up for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of views. Seriously, one-time donations. It's crazy. Thank you guys so much. Leave what you thought about the video down in the comments below. If you have any other theories about what's going on with the show, if we missed any of those, literary techniques that were going on in there. As always, you can find all of our social media. Just Google us, Bonsai Pop. Subscribe if you want. If you don't, I don't give a shit. And with that, I'm Mike. This is Bonsai Pop. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.